You know how long you've been waiting for this moment to close the deal. This giant opportunity for Carolina Vice Video LLC. It's time to go to work and get this done. It's finally here. I can enjoy the game I have always heard phenomenal reviews for. This has been the game I have been waiting for ever since Nintendo debuted their latest console. And it's never looked better thanks to the hard work the developers put into this remaster. Metroid Prime brought the queen of 2D into 3 dimensions and rocked the scene when gamers picked up the title. All of the small details that were built into this game are what made critics and game reviewers score this title so high. A fully immersive visor, capable of hindering the players and Samus's vision. A complete ecosystem on the biology of the plants and animals that you find. An intuitive user interface for completionists to use to check out all of their unlocked content. But what really made this game so sublime was how it looks and how it sounds. Metroid and Samus Aran lead the charge into science fiction for Nintendo, giving it a more distinguishable edge among Nintendo's more fantastical and whimsical IPs. Not only that, Metroid tends to lean more into the older and mature audience, which leads to more themes to explore. Most level designs are based off of excavation sites for mining or laboratories for research. Sites belonging to the Chozo adds a bit of mysticism with ruins and temples, highlighting their importance in the history of Metroid. The user interface is very pragmatic and needs very little updating. Everything is so easy to find, like controls, button layouts, sensitivity, and things like logbook entries and inventory have their own page so everything feels organized. Samus's HUD feels functional with a little stylish flair here and there, and the addition of the visible visor creates a feeling of being in the bounty hunter's shoes and encapsulates you in this foreign world. The map layout uses hexagonal prisms for its design, one of the few shapes found in nature to help illustrate the land and the elevation. Each location on the map feels significant for Samus's journey. Talon 4's overworld feels exactly how an overworld should. Welcoming, enticing, it provokes your curiosity in the best way. The grandeur of the music helps keeps the player wandering through the alien foliage. Chozo Ruin serves as the training grounds for Samus to utilize her abilities, with several areas to use the Morph Ball and destructible walls to clear out with the missiles. The ambient scents of this region get the player ready to be tested, with random audio effects to keep you on your toes. The next 2 areas on the list are gate-kept by their extreme temperature conditions, extreme heat and extreme cold. Magmoor Caverns lets you know that this area will be full of trials and dangers with its foreboding deep vocals and drums. The narrow rooms and corridors make the design of this place a bottleneck to traverse in, making you either go in one direction or another, which made it my least favorite place to come back to. Phendrana Drifts almost feels like the sister to Magmoor Caverns, with the vocals being higher pitched, designed to enchant you. But don't be fooled, this place hides just as many trials as the Magmoor Caverns. Oddly enough, Phendrana is the only place that isn't directly linked to the overworld, making this place feel a little bit more isolated and special. The sunken frigate is technically a part of the Talon overworld, but since it is completely submerged in water and is in the wreckage of the ship that we started on, it could be its own respectable level. Like the sirens of mythology, the music here wishes to put you in a trance and drown you in its melody. The entire vibe in here is almost somber. Like, this piece of technology fell from grace and is now just pollution for Talon 4's ecosystem. The music in the Phazon Mines takes a back seat and just lets a few eerie tones to mix with the audio from the environment itself to create its own soundtrack, like the hissing of radiation. Or the shrieks from enemies. The lack of an overpowered tune here reinforces that the player needs to be on their guard and to listen up for hazards. Both visually and auditorially, Metroid Prime creates its own identity among Nintendo's household names. Samus Aran was orphaned by space pirates when she was a child, and was fostered by an ancient alien race called the Chozo. In order to survive amongst their homeworld, Zebes, they infused their DNA into Samus, giving her advanced capabilities beyond that of a human being. This, paired with the military training during her time in the Galactic Federation, made her one certified badass. She would eventually aid the Federation as a bounty hunter, striking out on her own accord. During her many trials in space, the bioengineered Metroid seemed to be at the heart of all of her troubles. Metroids have the ability to siphon the energy out of anything, whether it's adamant or inanimate. The Chozo were actually the ones to create the Metroids, but ever since their creation, they have been falling into the wrong hands, like that of the space pirates. Taking place right after Zero mission, Samus answers a distress call from the frigate Orpheon, orbiting the planet Talon 4, and it's here where our journey with the space bounty hunter begins. There's a lot riding on a first level in a video game. It needs to balance being a tutorial and also provide some challenges to engage the player. Exploring the frigate Orpheon doesn't feel like a tutorial level. The game has you shoot some targets to set off a force field and prepares you to use your scanner to analyze objects and open doors. In fact, scanning items is how you're going to reveal Metroid Prime's backstory and dive deep into the lore. But after the game gets you familiar with these two things, the progression of the level feels natural. This, paired with the small details in the background, brings you right in. There's no time wasted to make you feel comfortable. In fact, Metroid titles don't want you to feel comfortable. They're small creatures moving under the shaft beneath you. The first room stitches the scene in your mind, just a chaotic disaster. Spider-like legs on fire. An injured alien pulls a weapon on you. You proceed with caution, following the morbid trail left for you. You find more injured aliens, a research facility within the freighter, creatures held in tanks. The more you see, the more questions you have. Now, one of my favorite part of Metroid games is its use of foreshadowing, and being able to scan all of these creatures in these tanks is just one of those little details that get you excited for what's to come. After downloading the schematics of the ship, the game leads you into this chamber. And not even 15 minutes into the game, and it's time for a boss fight. Parasite Queen gets you ready for combat. Strafing around this grotesque beast and looking for an opening while dodging the Queen's attacks is, in short, the base of the combat in this game. Once she is defeated, she falls into the ship's reactor core, destabilizing it. Now, it wouldn't be a Metroid game if it didn't make you race against the clock to evacuate the ship before it explodes.
Evacuate immediately. Evacuate immediately.
Just because you defeated the boss, though, doesn't mean that your battles are over. You will still have obstacles to overcome while you make your exodus. On your way out, you run into Samus's longtime rival, Ridley, or in this case, Meta Ridley, the intelligent space pirate that orphaned Samus. Now, Ridley and Samus have had several battles together, and it appears through cybernetics he is being kept alive. Once he spots you, he wastes no time and flies off. Right before we're in the clear, Samus suffers a hit from an explosion that damages her suit, leaving you without most of her special abilities. And the reason for this is, well, it's a Metroid game, and you have to grind for your upgrades. Once you finally make it out of the freighter, you witness its destruction as debris and space pirates are blown out of the hulls of the ship, and Ridley is making his way to the surface of Talon 4. Samus, now without her suit's special abilities, pursues him without hesitation, and this is where the fun begins. Once you enter Talon 4's atmosphere, the whole tone of the game shifts. Instead of feeling frantic and anxious, the layout of the land is familiar and welcoming. At first glance, it feels like you're back on Earth. Tiny waterfalls, towering trees, a serene rainfall washes from your visor. But when you take a closer look, you realize this place is very alien. Most of the creatures in this area are small or not very aggressive, emphasizing that you should be exploring and using your scanner. The beginning of the game really makes you appreciate the level layout and the platforming that you have to do. Some doors aren't accessible due to either height limitations or some other power-up that would help you get into the area. This design creates an invisible hand telling the player where they need to go without directly stating it, giving the feeling of satisfaction to the player for finding their own way to the next section. But when you get to the Chozo ruins, the game escalates the threats and challenges, making platforming a little bit more difficult by making the player avoid toxic water. While doing this, the player still needs to use their scanner to gather intelligence. It doesn't take long for the player to catch on to the formula that the game creates for you. Explore, reward, fight some enemies. A new path opens up. Explore some more. Reward. This will go on, and it doesn't get old. Gathering Samus's power-ups just makes her and the player feel more powerful. This portion of the game is a little bit more puzzle heavy, but nothing's too droll. After you fight a couple mini bosses here and there and have acquired a decent amount of power-ups, it's time for Samus to face the evil plant-based Pokemon, Flagra. Now, this boss fight felt a little gimmicky. You have to shoot the solar lamps off of Flagra so there's nothing giving her sunlight. Then you can go into Morph Ball mode and do some damage with the Morph Ball Bomb, which must be repeated 4 times. I think the reason why I didn't care for this boss fight so much is that it felt too stagnant and repetitive. Sure, Flagra has a couple attacks here and there, but you basically have to keep on shooting her until you have an opening to shoot the lamps. Yeah, safe to say this is my least favorite boss fight. Flagra's downfall is your ascendance into getting the Varia suit. Allowing Samus to go into regions with extreme temperatures. Naturally, Magmor Mines is the next place we want to check out with this upgrade, which the game leads you right to it. And it's this area that really takes off the training wheels with its lava pits, fouler enemies, and it's this section of the game where it's a good idea to keep an eye out for save points, because once you die, you will start where you last saved. It doesn't matter if you beat a boss or just got an upgrade. If you haven't gotten to a save station, find one. On this route through Hellfire, we eventually make it to an elevator that takes us to Phendrana Drifts, and it's here where we're going to secure more of Samus's abilities. In contrast to Magmor Caverns, Phendrana Drifts has a welcoming atmosphere. Ironically, you can only access this icy tundra through the fiery mines. Every other area can be accessed through the overworld, making this place feel more isolated, which honestly feels like an oversight. The big item that we get next is the boost for the Morph Ball, which turns Samus into this half-pipe shredding skater. Seriously, this little attachment in the game was the first thing that made me think, wow, I am definitely playing a Nintendo game. It's just the right amount of fun I expect to see in their titles. But after this upgrade, this is where I had my first hiccup with the title. You are forced to backtrack to the overworld to get the space jump boots, and then back to the drifts. And unfortunately, this won't be the last time you have to go back and forth. And Magmor Mines just isn't that pleasant to keep having to fight through. So after spending half an hour getting from one region to another, the game throws another mini-boss with the Sheegoth encounter. This is where the game really tests your maneuverability and intelligence. More than likely, players are going to have to scan Sheegoth to figure out its weakness, or else good luck figuring it out. After you defeat the Icy Beast, you're rewarded with the Wave Beam, which is going to allow Samus to go through more doors, and now you can attack some enemies with an electric-based weapon. But it's here where things really start to turn up. While in the frigid region of Talon 4, and completing another puzzle leading to a save room, you're going to go through this door, where it comes out of nowhere. Your first humanoid enemy since you landed on Talon 4. This little section left such an impression on me, like I almost forgot that I'd be fighting space pirates from time to time. And once you break the seal, they come at you in full force. Some encounters with the space pirates will lock you in a room until you defeat them, and once you clear that up, get ready to deal with space pirates with jetpacks. No, this is not a Dr. Evil impression. This is for real. Upon death, the pirate will try to kamikaze you, which may seem bad at first, but since defeating enemies drops ammo and health, it actually prevents items from being unattainable in the air. I thought this was a pretty cool way to justify this mechanic, so the player can get their ammo and energy drops. The further you march into this area, the creepier it gets. Instead of being in the open, now you're squeezing through the pirates' facility, and it turns out they are testing different organisms with something that they're finding off the planet. And this is when it happens. You find a Metroid that breaks out of its confinements and attacks you. So now there's a new enemy type to look out for. And the Metroids are bullet sponges, at least until you get the Ice Beam. The name Metroid was given to them by the Chozo, which meant Ultimate Warrior, so it makes sense why these gelatinous looking things are difficult to put down. The space pirates are still gunning for you, so it's obvious they really don't want you seeing what they're doing down here. Once you get to the bottom of the facility, Samus gets her new upgrade, the thermal visor. And not a moment too soon, because the power goes off in the facility and shit gets dark. Switch to your thermal visor and space pirates and Metroids are coming at you from every which way in the dark. So you have your vision impaired from the visor, and all you want to do is get the hell out of here. I'll never forget riding the elevator to leave the facility. My health was super low, and all I could hear was Samus's labored breathing. The intensity was surreal at this point. And then I finally made it out into the open, but then the flying space pirates were waiting for me.
Throw me a frickin' bone here!
This was the first time I had died in the game, but I was so thrilled at the experience I just had. That level just captured what a 3D Metroid should do. Feeling trapped, the fear, and fighting for your life as you push through is what playing a Metroid is all about. But sadly, this is also the point in the game where all that tight level design that guides you kind of falls apart, but more on that in a second. Thardus is the next boss we fight, and this was way more interesting than Flagra. Thardus has more attacks to watch out for, and you have to switch from your heat visor back to your normal visor in order to find his weak point. This fight still isn't stellar by any means, but it does warm up to the idea that you will have to switch visor in later boss fights. After Thardus falls, you get the Spider Ball, which allows Samus to roll up on tracks spread up across the map, which is going to open up a lot more areas. But it's here where I had to start looking up a walkthrough or reference a guide online. The game really doesn't push you in the right direction. In fact, it almost detours you from where you need to go next. From what I understand, while the original game was being developed, the team at Retro Studios were under a time crunch to get this game out, and I think the layout of the map exploits that from time to time. After 20 minutes or so, the game will give you a hint on where you need to go next, but at that point you could have been headed in the opposite direction just exploring, and then you have to backtrack. I think the map issue was fixed in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes because everything was connected to a general hub area. There's plenty more upgrades for Samus to acquire, so after we get the hint to go back to the Chozo ruins, meet the Chozo guru of bowling,
I'm the dude,
and get our Ice Beam, it's time to get one of Samus's most powerful suits, the Gravity Suit. Samus may be able to breathe and enter underwater areas, but she still moves slow. These areas really stuck out for me on my first playthrough. That first plunge into a body of water, you don't really know what to expect. Which, by the way, the developers didn't take any shortcuts with the underwater sections. The amount of submarine life you find is incredible. Once you finally get Samus' sweet gravity suit, it's time to explore the crash frigate Orpheon, and aesthetic-wise, was my favorite section of the game. The spaceship from the beginning of the game makes a great set piece, and making it this drowned graveyard filled with aquatic life works extremely well. Most of the things under the ocean do look alien. You still do a bit of fighting down here, but the game slows itself down a bit, but in a good way. This gives the player time to breathe and take in whatever happens next, which is finding the last region in the game. The Phazon Mines. The Phazon mines are huge, probably the biggest area in the game thanks to their elevation. 3 main levels and each one is harder to traverse than the last. But it's here where we learn that this radiating material with blue iridescence is called Phazon. The name was coined by the space pirates when they detected its large radiation from the planet. Turns out they had been experimenting with Phazon on different organisms, hence the Metroids we found in the labs earlier. This stuff is dangerous for Samus to be near, so it poses as an environmental threat in this area. Now, there are 2 great examples of how they utilize the Morph Ball here. This Rubik's Cube-like tower, and this electric field maze were a few highlights in here, at least the first time you see them. You do have to backtrack through this tower a couple times and it loses its novelty, but I must applaud the developers for how well the Morph Ball was used in this game. Out of all of Samus's abilities from 2D to 3D, this one has the most innovation. The grueling part about this point in the game is the fact that you have to go through this area several times, and I'll explain why soon. There's still plenty to do and explore in Phazon Mines. However, the game is going to jerk us out into Magmoor Caverns again. We enter what I like to call the acquisition phase. Now, for the start of this phase, I am 100% recommending using a guide because it is time to gather the 12 Chozo artifacts, as well as the last set of upgrades. This final stretch of the game falls somewhere in being an exhausting scavenger hunt across Talon 4 and a victory lap. At this point, since Samus has most of her upgrades, the space pirates and other foes are hardly a threat. Now, at the end of a Metroid game, something like this isn't uncommon. It's a trope to have the player realize just how far they have come with the space bounty hunter. And there's cathartic satisfaction to be had. I mean, now you can go through and one-shot enemies that used to give you a tough time. But this still falls under a fetch quest, which kind of puts a damper on the celebratory tour of Talon 4. But let's talk about the why are we getting these 12 items. Long before the player in Samus got to Talon 4, it was hit by a meteor, carrying Phazon, which again corrupts life forms. So in order to stop its spread, the Chozo built a temple around the crater site to imprison the meteorite, so only those who the Chozo deem worthy can go into this area. The underlying message here, you cannot complete this game without doing this. Now, you can go about this fetch quest in a couple different ways. There's no exact sequence. You may just need to get a few upgrades first to get all the artifacts. Getting the plasma beam first is what I would recommend, and getting the artifacts in the Phazon Mines last makes the most sense. Because we will be fighting the most difficult boss at this point, and that is the Omega Pirate. Injected with massive amounts of Phazon, the Omega Pirate will have you utilize nearly everything we've learned in combat so far. Switching visors, fighting grunts that make you switch between beams. Yeah, safe to say I died my first try with this guy. Phazon pumped bitch! But the trick here is just to focus on the Omega Pirate. If you focus too much on the grunts, it's really just going to draw this fight out, which is going to make you weaker in the long run. But once you plaster this Phazon junkie, the unexpected happens. Nah, I'm just kidding. Samus gets one of my personal favorite suits of all time, her sexy Phazon suit. This suit feels exclusive for the Prime series, as it should. I think it deviates too much for the original design, but it's definitely fitting for these games. It's a pretty harsh contrast from what came before, with Samus' suits being bright and colorful. Instead, this is mainly black and chrome with red lights emitting from it, and I love it. But at the same time, this kind of color scheme shouldn't be done too often. For the majority of Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, it has you in a similar suit, and I can't say I'm a big fan of that choice. The Power Suit, the Various Suit, the Gravity Suit, And even the fusion suit, even though Samus doesn't have this right now in the timeline, are all amazing designs for Samus. But the Phazon suit is not only aesthetically pleasing, but Samus won't be harmed by that bright blue radiating stuff anymore, allowing us to complete our little scavenger hunt. This is also the time to finish up getting whatever power-ups like energy tanks and missiles, because we are headed to the end of the game. So make sure you are satisfied with your loadout, or else you may have to backtrack even more later. Now that you've gathered all the Dragon Balls, it's time to make a wish. As long as that wish is to fight Meta Ridley. Now this fight really holds no significance to the narrative. Meta Ridley is here just to give Samus and you a hard time. But he makes for a pretty fun boss fight, despite the fact that he keeps flying away, leaving you with nothing to do until he comes back. But when he is around, this battle is pretty brutal. These two bitter rivals exchange blows, fighting tooth and nail to best one another. I almost died my first time fighting Ridley, and I just remember thinking, I hope that I don't die because I would have to start this all over, and this boss fight is pretty time consuming. Ridley has a pretty obscure weakness, and again, having to wait for him to be in range makes this boss fight feel a little dated. Now, I know I've bashed the boss fights pretty hard in this game, but I know the developers at Retro Studios would grow in this field as the trilogy progressed. Meta Ridley meets his demise after he sets off the Chozo Temple of Doom alarm and gets lasered in the face and falls off a cliff. You dead, bruh. And now, the passage to the interior of the crater has opened itself. And the interior of the crater pumps some horror biopunk with its design. I mean, the whole place looks like we took a trip in the Magic School Bus into someone's mouth. But it turns out there's even more concentrated Phazon in this area, called Red Phazon, despite it being more orange in color. This new environmental hazard, paired with the Metroids, make getting to the final boss feel like a chore. No, it doesn't feel like a chore, it definitely is just a chore. Speaking of the final boss, let's talk about the titular villain, Metroid Prime. This disgusting looking spider crab was once a Metroid that phased through the barrier the Chozo had created and bathed in the Phazon radiation until it evolved into the gluttonous Metroid Prime. Now the concept here is a fitting end for a Metroid game. It's creepy, it's in the heart of a dangerous area, everything about this climactic duel makes the player feel uncomfortable to some degree. Especially when it crawls over you with its thorax, like, ugh, that's nasty, dude. Taking down Metroid Prime is actually pretty simple. Metroid Prime's emitting lights will change periodically, signaling to the player what beam to use. Now, I do think that the color code is pretty lazy, but at least the movement of this creature is pretty realistic. I mean, it feels like you're in its nest, especially since it keeps luring you deeper and deeper. Just when I thought I finished the spider crab, it loses its exoskeleton and turns into Queen Ghost Octopus Lady? So apparently this thing is Metroid Prime's core, its essence. And you'd think after Elden Ring, I'd be used to a second phase in a boss fight, but again, I had no idea this was coming. This was an authentic surprise for me. Now, in this form, Metroid Prime can only be damaged by consuming more Phazon. The problem with this mechanic is that you have to wait for Metroid Prime to excrete the poison, then you can get inside of the puddle to shoot it, all while dodging Metroid Prime's attacks, and switching visors. So I'm not a big fan when a game decides the only way for me to damage a boss is on its time. Like, a lot of this fight is just evading because you can't do anything to take down the boss. I'm sorry, but that's just kind of a poor execution. Oh well, at least the set piece, design, and ending feel right at home with Metroid. This Phazon-infused Metroid tries to swallow Samus whole before it becomes unstable, destroying the impact crater and the source of Phazon on Talon 4. Fun fact, Samus' appearance was actually based off Kim Basinger, and I'd say they hit the mark. But just when we think the Phazon problem is over, we see this. Leading into the second installment of the Prime trilogy. Congratulations, you made it this far into the video. Let's talk about some quality of life changes I want to see for Metroid Prime 4. Number 1, make the player / Samus earn the ability of fast travel. Now I know Metroid Prime 2 Echoes did its own thing with fast traveling, and that's fine. That gives the developers something to work off of. That would alleviate so much of the backtracking that you have to do. Number 2, continue to implement 2D Metroid into, well, the 3D Metroid. Like, let's get Samus to feel as powerful as she does at the end of a 2D Metroid game. Now, I'm no Metroid expert by any means, but when Samus is at her full power in Metroid Dread, it was like nothing I had experienced before. I feel like Samus' grapple beam could be utilized far more than it gets utilized here in Metroid Prime. If you take a look at the video game Ghost Runner had a grapple that was so seamless, it was so fluid. If they could give that to Samus and definitely not make it some kind of crutch, if they could implement that into 3D Metroid, I think it would make traversing this giant labyrinth even better. Number 3, give us checkpoints, at least for boss fights. If I can get a checkpoint in a freaking Soulsborne game, then give me a checkpoint in a Metroid game. Like, it's okay. It shifts the focus to the boss fight instead of just getting to the boss fight. Like, that is so frustrating. Like, with this game, I was getting frustrated with the final boss because you can't get to Metroid Prime's, like, actual lair without having to go through the atrium where all of the Metroids are just flying everywhere and trying to literally suck your life source from you. So you can see why that's problematic. So that's my quality of life changes I would like to see for Metroid Prime 4, but let's go ahead and talk about the narrative. Give us a new villain. As much as I like Dark Samus, and as much as I like the whole Phazon corrupting thing or whatever, the doppelganger trope has been done already in this franchise, so let's not triple dip at this point. You know, let's go ahead and give Samus a whole new villain. I get it that it probably will have to do with Phazon, since that is literally what all the Prime games have been about. So I understand if they have to include Phazon into this enemy, but let's take a look at Ravenbeak from Metroid Dread. I mean, this guy deserves to be in Smash Brothers. If we could get an original character like Ravenbeak was, that would be hype! I really appreciate all those at Nintendo and Retro Studios for giving their fan base one of their most beloved titles. I highly recommend this title. Despite all my nitpicks with it, I really just think this is a Nintendo gem. If you're a Nintendo fan, I just kind of feel like you owe it to yourself to play this revolutionary game. I mean, it was a revolution on one of its biggest characters. I have been fighting every urge to play Metroid Dread after I played this game. Metroid Dread is a must-have Switch title, by the way. Chef's kiss. But alright guys, I'm signing out, so until next time, y'all be good. Peace.